They never called me by my name. To my parents, I was simply the disappointment. That title clung to me like a curse, whispered in sighs and echoed in silences. My brother Marcus, on the other hand, was worshipped like a prince in a kingdom built just for him. He was the pride of the Rowan family, the prodigy who conquered every classroom, the one who secured a place at Cambridge with a full scholarship. On the day he graduated, my father paraded him before a hall of strangers, announcing with thunder in his voice that Marcus would inherit everything. Our $80 million company, the estate in Boston, even the sleek new Jaguar parked outside. Guests roared with approval as if they had witnessed a coronation. I sat at the back, invisible. My palms damp, my throat dry. I wondered if this was all life had for me, living in Marcus's shadow, choking on their praise for him while my name was forgotten. But then, something unexpected happened. A stranger brushed past the crowd and stopped at my side. He placed a heavy white envelope in my hands and whispered, "It's time they learn who you really are." In that instant, everything began to unravel. Growing up in the Rowan household was like living inside a glass museum where only Marcus's trophies were on display. Love was not shared, it was distributed like prizes, and Marcus always won them. My father, Leonard Rowan, made it clear who mattered and who didn't. Marcus was the heir, the golden child destined to extend the Rowan legacy. I was the shadow. At family dinners, the arrangement never changed. Father sat at the head of the long oak table, Marcus to his right, my mother, Evelyn, beaming with pride as Marcus recited his latest achievements. By the time I found the courage to speak, the conversation had already passed me by. I learned quickly that silence was safer than the sting of their mockery. I'll never forget one evening when I was 15. Marcus had just been accepted into an elite summer research program. Applause erupted, glasses clinked. My father raised his wine and declared, "That is what it means to be a Rowan, excellence, brilliance, leadership." Then he glanced at me with a cruel smile. "And you, Elias, you passed gym class. Small victories deserve small celebrations." The table laughed. Even my mother. I laughed too, but inside something was breaking. My mother had a way of cutting me without raising her voice. While passing me plates or folding laundry into my arms, she would whisper, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" Her tone was calm, almost casual, but those words sank deep, like stones in water. Marcus thrived in their spotlight. He wore their praise like a crown, striding through the world with his shoulders squared and his confidence untouchable. He knew he was the favorite, and he enjoyed reminding me of it. When I was 17, I worked nights at a diner to buy my own clothes and save for a second-hand laptop. One evening as I left for my shift, Marcus lounged on the couch with our parents circling him like moths to a flame. He smirked and said, "Don't forget to scrub the grease off before touching the door. We wouldn't want the neighbors thinking the Rowans hired a servant." My parents laughed. They always laughed. I didn't reply. I walked out into the night, my uniform stiff against my skin, my chest aching with humiliation. Every word, every joke like that chipped away at me. The only person who didn't see me that way was my grandfather. My grandfather, Samuel Rowan, was the only one who ever looked at me and saw more than failure. He was the man who built the Rowan Empire from scratch, long before it became a symbol of wealth and status. But unlike my father, Samuel believed in people, not just profit. Whenever I visited him, he never asked about grades or accolades. Instead, he asked about my thoughts, my dreams, the things that made me curious. He listened in a way no one else in my family ever did. One autumn afternoon, we sat together on his porch while leaves drifted down from the trees. He leaned closer and said, "Elias, never confuse their blindness with truth. You have something Marcus doesn't. One day when it matters most, you'll know it. Don't let them tell you otherwise." His words lingered, though I never fully understood them then. To me, I was still the forgotten son, just surviving in the shadows while Marcus was paraded as the future. At home, my father trained Marcus like a soldier preparing for war. He dragged him to board meetings at 16, introduced him to CEOs, and repeated to every guest that Marcus was the future of our legacy. I wasn't invited. I was told to mow the lawn. The older we became, the wider the gulf between us stretched. When Marcus received his acceptance letter from Cambridge, my parents treated it like the country had declared a national holiday. My mother hosted a lavish party that same night, champagne, chandeliers, even a string quartet in the corner. I stood among the guests like a ghost. Strangers shook my hand, assuming I was proud of my brother's success, but their smiles only deepened the emptiness inside me. They didn't see me. To them, I wasn't Elias Rowan. I was Marcus's brother. Nothing more. By 19, I stopped expecting recognition. I realized I could never earn my parents' love, so I quietly carved my own path. I worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs, loading boxes in warehouses, scrubbing dishes in diners, mopping aisles in supermarkets. While Marcus returned from summers abroad with stories of Italy and France, I came home with aching hands and calloused palms. My parents dismissed my efforts as wasted time. To them, I was squandering my youth. But what they couldn't see was how much strength I was building, piece by piece, hour by hour, in the silence they forced me into. Still, the weight of their judgment pressed down harder every year. My father's voice haunted me even when he wasn't in the room. "Elias, you'll never amount to anything," he would mutter, each word pressed into my chest like a branding iron. My mother's sighs seemed to follow me down hallways, reminders that I wasn't enough. And Marcus's laughter, it echoed like a cruel soundtrack, reminding me how effortlessly life bent in his favor. By the time Marcus's graduation approached, I had already braced myself. I knew what was coming. Another spectacle, another round of humiliation disguised as celebration. I imagined myself sitting silently in the back, swallowing my pride as they crowned him with yet another glory. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the life I had been forced to endure, the one lived in shadows and silence, was about to collide with a truth strong enough to split it open. I thought the day would break me. Instead, it became the day everything shifted. Because waiting for me at Marcus's graduation was an envelope, a simple white envelope, that would prove my grandfather's words right. That envelope would tear apart the story my parents had written for me and begin a story of my own. The day of Marcus's graduation felt less like a family milestone and more like a royal parade. From the moment the sun rose, my parents treated it as though it were the most sacred holiday of the year. My mother, Evelyn, stormed through the house, barking orders at the staff about flowers, catering, and seating arrangements. My father stood in the grand foyer, adjusting his cuff links, rehearsing the speech he would deliver to the hundreds of guests. And me? I had no role, no place. I was simply expected to sit quietly, wearing a suit that once belonged to Marcus, slightly altered to fit my frame. Even the tailoring felt like a reminder that I was always given leftovers. At the ceremony, my seat was in the far back. I watched from a distance as Marcus's name was called, his gown sweeping across the stage while applause thundered around us. My parents leapt to their feet, clapping until their palms reddened, their faces glowing with pride. I clapped too, though my hands felt heavy. Inside, my stomach knotted, twisting tighter with every cheer. I had already resigned myself to being invisible. I thought I knew what to expect. But I was wrong. After the ceremony, the true spectacle began. My parents had rented out a grand ballroom in downtown Boston, its ceiling glittering with chandeliers, the polished floor glowing beneath golden light. Outside, valets ushered in a stream of luxury cars while guests in gowns and tuxedos poured through the doors. But this wasn't just a graduation party. It was a coronation. Everyone knew Marcus wasn't just being celebrated for finishing school. He was about to be publicly named heir to the Rowan fortune. I did what I always did, stayed in the background. I leaned against the far wall, half hidden behind towering vases of lilies, trying to make myself smaller. People brushed past me without recognition, some whispering, "That must be the other son," as if I were nothing more than a footnote in my own family. Then came the moment I dreaded. My father stepped onto the stage, his voice booming through the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to honor my brilliant son, Marcus Rowan." The room exploded with applause. Marcus grinned confidently, every inch the golden heir. And I, tucked away in the shadows, felt the ground tilt beneath me. My father's words rolled through the ballroom like thunder. "The Rowan family has built more than a company, we have built a legacy. Tonight I am proud to announce that Marcus will carry this name forward. He will inherit our $80 million corporation, the estate in Boston, and the brand new Jaguar waiting outside." The crowd erupted again. Cheers, clinking glasses, and congratulations echoing from every corner. My mother stood proudly at my father's side, her hand resting on his arm, her smile wide and polished for the cameras. From across the room, Marcus lifted his champagne glass toward me. But it wasn't an invitation. It was mockery, a silent toast to my failure. His smirk said it all. "I won. You lost." I sank deeper into my chair, my chest tightening with every roar of celebration. Years of invisible labor, of swallowing insults, of being told I was nothing, all of it seemed to climax in this moment of public erasure. My mother brushed past me, her perfume sharp in the air. Without even meeting my eyes, she whispered, "At least don't ruin this night for your brother. Stay quiet." I clenched my fists under the table, rage and sorrow battling inside me. The speeches dragged on, each toast heavier than the last. Guests praised Marcus's brilliance, his future, his destiny. Laughter rippled across the ballroom while I sat frozen in my chair, trying to breathe through the storm rising inside me. And then, when the applause finally began to fade, I noticed him. A man in a dark suit moved through the crowd with steady purpose. He wasn't clapping, wasn't smiling, wasn't swept up in the celebration. His eyes locked on me alone, unblinking, unshakable. My pulse quickened. He cut through the crowd like a blade through silk, and when he reached me he leaned down, placing a thick white envelope on the table. His voice was low, deliberate, each word burning into me. "It's time to tell them who you really are." Before I could respond, he straightened his jacket, gave me the smallest nod, and disappeared back into the crowd as swiftly as he had arrived. I stared at the envelope, my fingers trembling above it. For years I had been mocked, silenced, erased. And yet, here was someone I didn't even know, claiming there was more to me than the story my family had written. My heart thundered. I slid the envelope into my lap, shielding it from curious eyes. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst through my chest. Part of me wanted to run, to slip out of the ballroom before anyone noticed, but his words echoed like a haunting refrain, "Who you really are." What could that mean? On stage, Marcus stood beside my father, soaking in applause, his grin wide and self-satisfied. Their voices blurred as if I were underwater, while my focus narrowed to the weight of that sealed envelope. I slipped a finger beneath the flap and froze. Was this some cruel trick? Another humiliation waiting to unfold? Or was it something else? The truth my grandfather had once hinted at? My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside were documents stamped with official seals, along with a folded letter written in handwriting I recognized instantly. My grandfather's. The first page made my breath catch. My name, Elias Rowan, appeared not as an afterthought, not as a mistake, but as the legal beneficiary. Shares of the Rowan Corporation, control of the Boston estate, and accounts I never knew existed, all in my name. And then his letter began, "Elias, if you are reading this, the time has come." My grandfather's words were steady, written in the same script I'd seen on birthday cards and old notes he used to slip into my pocket. "Elias, if you are reading this, it means the moment I've long prepared for has arrived. I watched you and Marcus grow. From the beginning, I knew brilliance alone was not enough to carry this family forward. I chose you, not Marcus, not your father, because you understand humility. You know what it is to endure without recognition. You see people for who they are, not what they can offer. Do not doubt yourself. Everything I built belongs to you." My vision blurred as tears stung my eyes. For years, I had believed I was nothing more than their shadow. Yet here was proof. The man who had built our empire, the one person who had ever seen me, had entrusted it all to me. I pressed the letter to my chest, a wave of disbelief and defiance colliding inside me. My father's voice boomed across the stage, his authority unshakable, his pride blinding. But for the first time I realized I held something stronger than his words. The envelope wasn't paper. It was freedom. I tucked the folder inside my jacket, holding it close as though it might vanish if I let go. My father's speech thundered on, his voice swelling with each declaration of Marcus's greatness. Guests raised their glasses, laughter echoing against the golden walls. But I wasn't listening anymore. My mind replayed every cruel moment that had brought me here, the smirk when my father called me worthless, the sighs when my mother compared me to Marcus, the mocking laughter that followed me through my youth. For years I had swallowed those insults until they hollowed me out. No more. The letter in my jacket wasn't just an inheritance. It was a truth that shattered their lies. My grandfather had seen me when no one else had, and he had chosen me. The realization surged through me like fire. I looked at Marcus, basking under the chandeliers. At my father, chest puffed with pride. At my mother, glowing for the cameras. And then I thought of my grandfather's words, "One day the truth will set you free." This was that day. I stood slowly, my knees unsteady but my resolve unshakable. For the first time in my life I would not stay silent. The music softened as another toast began. Glasses clinked, cheers rose, and Marcus's name once again filled the room like a hymn. My hands trembled, but I forced my legs to carry me forward. Every step felt like rebellion, like breaking through chains that had bound me for years. Heads turned as I moved toward the stage. Whispers rippled through the crowd, curious eyes following me. My father noticed me first, his expression tightening into a scowl. He leaned toward the microphone, his smile stretched thin. "Elias, this is not your moment," he muttered through clenched teeth. But I didn't stop. For years I had obeyed. For years I had accepted the shadows. Tonight I would not. I stepped onto the stage, my pulse racing. My mother shook her head in panic, her eyes sharp with warning. Marcus smirked, certain I was there to bow before him, to play the role of the forgotten brother one last time. But I raised my chin, clutching the envelope to my chest. My voice trembled at first, but then it steadied. Actually, Father, this moment belongs to me. The room fell silent. The silence in the ballroom was deafening. Glasses hung midair, frozen halfway to lips. Even the orchestra seemed to hesitate, their instruments falling quiet. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me as I stood at the edge of the stage, my hands trembling but my back straight. My father's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, his voice sharp enough to cut. Elias, step down. You're embarrassing yourself. For years, those words would have crushed me. For years, I had obeyed without question. But not tonight. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the documents. My voice carried farther than I thought possible. I'm not the one embarrassing myself. You are. Gasps rippled through the room. Marcus let out a nervous laugh, raising his glass again as if to mock me. What are you doing? Sit down before you make a fool of yourself. But my hands did not falter. I unfolded the papers, the seal of the Rowan Corporation gleaming under the lights. These are signed transfer agreements, I said, steady now. From Samuel Rowan. He chose me, not you, Marcus. Not you, Father. Me. The weight of the words hit the crowd like a storm. The room erupted into chaos. Some guests gasped aloud, others whispered frantically, craning their necks to glimpse the documents in my hands. My father lunged toward me, his face flushed with rage. This is absurd. That old man didn't know what he was signing. He was confused, But before he could tear the papers away, another voice cut through the noise. I knew exactly what I was doing. The crowd fell into stunned silence as my grandfather, Samuel Rowan, rose slowly from his chair near the front. He leaned heavily on his cane, but his presence commanded more power than anyone else in that room. Each tap of his cane against the polished floor echoed like a drumbeat as he made his way toward the stage. My father froze, his fury flickering into unease. When Samuel reached me, he placed a steady hand on my shoulder. His voice carried clear and strong. I gave those documents to someone I trusted, with instructions to deliver them when the time was right. That time is now. I chose Elias because I watched both my grandsons grow. Marcus, you have brilliance, but brilliance without humility becomes arrogance. My grandfather's gaze shifted toward my father, his words cutting like steel. Leonard, you built wealth, but in the process you lost compassion. You taught your son that power means domination, not responsibility. Then he turned back to me, his hand tightening gently on my shoulder. Elias has endured neglect and cruelty, yet he has not hardened his heart. He knows the value of every person, not just the powerful. That is why he will lead. Gasps rippled through the audience. The whispers grew louder, disbelief mingling with awe. Marcus's face paled, his smirk collapsing into something rawer, fear. Grandfather, you can't be serious, he stammered. I've worked my whole life for this. I've achieved more than Elias ever could. Samuel's eyes softened with sorrow, not anger. Yes, Marcus, you achieved much. But you achieved only for yourself. That is not leadership. That is vanity. My father's fists clenched. His voice rose, desperate now. You would give everything to him, the boy who failed, the one who never lived up to our name? Samuel's reply silenced the room. I am giving everything to the man who will redefine what our name means. The chandeliers seemed to tremble. For the first time in my life I felt the weight of being seen, truly seen. Not as the forgotten son, not as the failure, but as the rightful heir to something greater than wealth. I turned to the audience, the papers steady in my grip. My voice no longer trembled. All my life I was told I was nothing, that I would never measure up. Tonight you heard my father declare it again. But here in my hands is the truth. My grandfather believed in me when no one else did. I will not waste what he entrusted to me. I will honor this family's legacy, not by building walls of pride, but by building bridges of worth. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then, slowly, hands began to clap. Hesitant at first, then stronger. The sound spread like wildfire until the room roared with applause that drowned out the silence that had once suffocated me. I caught my father's face, red with fury, his jaw clenched so tight it looked like it might shatter. My mother's perfect smile had vanished, her lips trembling. And Marcus? He stood frozen, his glass still raised, his superiority crumbling in front of everyone. The stranger who had given me the envelope watched from the back and nodded once. Applause thundered through the ballroom, echoing against the gilded walls. But for me it wasn't about the noise, it was about what it meant. For once the clapping wasn't for Marcus. It was for me. I looked toward my grandfather, who stood tall despite the weight of his years. His hand still rested firmly on his cane, but his eyes shone with pride I had never seen directed at me before. "Now show them why I was right," he whispered. Something inside me broke open. The years of silence, the cruelty, the labels, they no longer defined me. I wasn't the forgotten son. I wasn't the failure. I was Elias Rowan, and I had finally stepped into my place. My father's glare seared through me, his rage palpable. My mother turned away, unable to meet my eyes. Marcus lowered his glass, his face pale, his confidence stripped bare. And yet, in that moment, none of them mattered. The stranger who had slipped me the envelope disappeared into the crowd, leaving only the echo of his words. "It's time to tell them who you really are." Now I had. And there was no going back. The applause eventually faded into murmurs, tension thickening in the air. My father's voice cut through it, low and venomous. "This isn't the end, Elias. You have no idea what you're stepping into." His words dripped with bitterness, his fists clenched as though he could will the documents from my hands. Then he turned sharply and stormed out, his polished shoes cracking against the marble floor like gunfire. My mother followed close behind, her face pale, her carefully constructed mask shattered. She couldn't bear the stares of the very people she'd invited to admire her perfect family. Marcus stayed rooted in place, his body rigid, his fists trembling around the stem of his champagne glass. His voice was a hiss sharp enough to cut. "You don't deserve this. You're nothing compared to me." For the first time I met his eyes without flinching. "Maybe I'm not who you think I should be. But I am exactly who grandfather believes I can be. And that's enough." The truth flickered in his eyes, fear. The foundation of his superiority was crumbling. He was no longer untouchable. And I was no longer the shadow. My grandfather straightened, taller than I had seen him in years. Though he leaned on his cane, his voice carried with unshakable strength. "This family changes tonight. The company is in new hands, hands that know what it means to be overlooked, to be doubted, to endure without recognition. Elias, the burden is yours now, but it is also your gift." His words sank deep into me, heavy with both promise and responsibility. I knew then that this was not just an inheritance, it was a calling. The crowd began to applaud again, stronger this time, no longer hesitant. Their clapping rose like a tide, sweeping away the silence that had defined me for years. I stood taller under the weight of it, no longer the forgotten brother. Marcus's eyes burned with fury, but beneath it I saw something new, uncertainty. His smirk was gone. His power had slipped. That night, when the ballroom finally emptied and the chandeliers dimmed, I stepped outside into the Boston air. The city lights stretched across the skyline, glittering like a million promises. For years, I had looked at them as though they belonged to everyone but me. Now they felt like mine. The cool night air wrapped around me, sharp and alive. I stood on the steps of the ballroom, the echo of applause still vibrating in my chest. For the first time, I didn't feel like a shadow watching the world pass me by. I felt free. I thought back to the boy I once was, the boy who sat silently at the far end of the dinner table, swallowing jokes and comparisons, pretending the laughter didn't hurt. The boy who worked late nights in greasy diners while his brother traveled the world. The boy who believed the cruel voices that told him he was nothing. That boy had carried the weight of silence for years. But tonight, under the glow of city lights, I felt him shed his chains. My grandfather stepped out to join me, his cane tapping softly against the stone. He placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. "You see now, don't you?" he asked. I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes, I see it clearly." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the lights of the city. "Then carry it well. The future is yours." For the first time I believed him. I drew in a deep breath, letting the night air fill my lungs. The fear, the shame, the years of being invisible, they no longer held me captive. I wasn't the dumb one. I wasn't the disappointment. I was the heir my grandfather had chosen, not because of perfection but because of resilience. The weight of that truth sank in, terrifying and liberating all at once. Running a corporation worth millions wasn't a dream I had prepared for. It was a mountain I had just been told to climb. Yet for the first time I felt I could. Not because I wanted revenge on my father or to humiliate Marcus, but because I wanted to honor the faith my grandfather had placed in me. Inside, I could still hear the muffled murmurs of the remaining guests. Their view of me had shifted in a single night, from failure to leader, from outcast to heir. And though some doubted, though some whispered, I no longer cared. I had been forged in silence, sharpened by cruelty, strengthened by neglect. What they thought was weakness had become the very thing that prepared me to rise. And I was ready. The night pressed on, but something inside me had already shifted forever. I thought of Marcus, still standing in that ballroom with his glass trembling in his hand. For the first time he couldn't meet my eyes. The smirk he'd worn since childhood had vanished, replaced by something raw, fear. I thought of my mother, her perfect smile cracked, unable to bear the weight of the truth. And my father, storming out in fury, vowing that this wasn't the end. But none of them could erase what had happened. Not anymore. I lifted my head toward the skyline, the city stretching endlessly, alive with possibility. Those lights had always seemed distant, meant for someone else's future, Marcus's perhaps. But tonight they belonged to me. I realized then that my story was no longer about surviving the cruelty of my family. It was about rising in spite of it. Every insult, every dismissal, every night of silence had shaped me into someone who could withstand the storm. The chains they tried to lock me in had become the armor I now wore. And I was no longer afraid to stand in the light. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the memory of the ballroom fade, letting the weight of my grandfather's words settle deep in my chest. I was no longer the overlooked boy. I was no longer the silent shadow. I was the man chosen not by chance but by character. And I wanted others to know something too. If you've ever been called less, if you've ever been mocked, if you've ever been pushed aside and told you were nothing, remember this: the voices that try to bury you do not define your worth. The scars they leave are not chains, they are proof of your endurance. There will come a moment, a single, undeniable moment, when the truth reveals itself. And when it does, it will roar louder than every insult, every laugh, every dismissal you've ever endured. That night I finally understood, being underestimated was never my curse. It was my preparation. The Rowan name would no longer be a monument to arrogance and pride. It would become a legacy of resilience, humility, and strength. And as I looked out over the city, I whispered to myself, my time has come. The future was no longer theirs. It was mine.